For this lesson, we need to open the sample file invoice2 from your sample files folder. In the last lesson, lesson 322, you added a VLOOKUP function to cell B6 to bring back the description corresponding to the code entered in cell A6. We'll now add a VLOOKUP to do exactly the same thing for the price in cell C6. So I click in cell C6, I click Formulas, Lookup and Reference, and VLOOKUP. For the lookup value, I click on the code that the user will enter in cell A6. For the table array, as last time, I'll type stock, the name of the table where the stock information is contained on the stock worksheet. For the col index num, let's have another look at the stock sheet. And you can see that the selling price is in column 5, so I'll type 5 for the col index num. And as described in the last lesson, it's very important that we type false for the range lookup, so that an error will be returned if an incorrect code is entered in cell A6. I click the OK button, and you can see that the description and price are being returned for the Cartier tank. Let's try that with a different stock code, BR48. This time we bring back the price and the description for the Breitling duograph. Let's now autofill those formulas down to the next 2 rows. You can see that when codes are added to all 3 rows, things look fine. But we need to cater for customers that only want to purchase one watch. And in this case, we need to remove those NA error messages from cells B7 to C8. In order to remove those ugly error messages, we'll need to improve the VLOOKUP formula that's returning the descriptions. So I click in cell B6, and I'm going to use an ifError function to suppress the error messages. It's worth mentioning at this stage that if you use the ifError function in a workbook, you won't be able to share it with users of earlier Excel versions, because the ifError function is a brand new function for Excel 2007. I'm going to wrap the VLOOKUP function with an ifError function. When one function is used inside another function, we refer to the outside function as a wrapper, and that's just what I'm going to do with the VLOOKUP. I click to the left of the V and type ifError, and then open a bracket. And you can see that the ifError function accepts 2 arguments. First of all, the value, and in this case it's whatever the VLOOKUP function returns, and secondly, what to show in place of the normal error message if the first argument returns an error. In other words, what we'll show instead of those ugly #NA error messages. And in this case, I'll just open and close quotation marks, meaning a blank string. In other words, nothing at all. I'll close the bracket, press the Enter key. Nothing seems to have happened at the moment because I'm not auto-filled the formula. Things are working fine for B6 because the VLOOKUP isn't returning an error message, but when I auto-fill down to B7 and B8, a blank string is now being returned in place of the earlier error message. Let's now do the same thing for the VLOOKUP function in cell C6. So I click just ahead of the V, type ifError, open a bracket, and for the return value in an error condition, an empty string. I close the bracket, press the Enter key, and for the Breitling duograph, I'm returning the price, because BR48 is a valid stock code. But if I autofill this down to the next 2 lines, I return a blank space instead of the error message. I could even enter a valid code in row 8 and things would work just fine, even though there's nothing in row 7. And of course, I could add a watch to all 3 rows, and that would work fine as well. The invoice now works perfectly, so you can save your work, and I'm going to save it with the new name, Invoice3, and as usual, I'll save it to the folder above my sample files folder. I click the Save button, and we're done.